I woke to a sound that made my stomach drop. A relentless, grinding roar tearing through the early morning stillness. At first I thought it was a nightmare. The kind where reality bends and your mind refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. But the dust in the air, the acrid scent of burnt diesel, the trembling of the earth beneath my boots, they were all too real. I stumbled toward the window and froze. My fields, stretching for acres under the soft glow of sunrise, had been transformed into a war zone. Bulldozers carved through the soil with terrifying precision. Cranes swung over fences I'd painstakingly repaired last season, throwing splintered wood into the air. The barn, the old oak by the creek, the fields where my father had taught me to plant seeds and respect the earth, they were all under siege. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. She was right there. Margaret Caldwell, the HOA president, perched atop a mound of freshly dug dirt, clipboard in hand, her posture regal, her smile cold. She looked every bit the commander of an army, as if she owned not just the land, but everything it represented. "Morning, Ethan," she called, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're just making changes. The neighborhood will benefit." I stepped outside, the wind carrying the dust into my lungs. My boots sank into the churned-up soil. Despite my own trembling, I clenched my hands into fists. This is my land." "You can't do this." Margaret tilted her head, the smirk never leaving her face. "Oh, come now. You'll thank us one day. You're just in the way of progress." Progress. The word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My sanctuary. My family's legacy. The land that had nourished generations, reduced to rubble in a single morning. I wanted to run toward her, to scream, to stop the destruction with my own hands. But then I caught myself. My heartbeat slowed as a cold, deliberate thought settled in. Margaret had made a mistake, a massive one. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I am Ethan Harper, director of the Federal Aviation Administration. I've spent my life ensuring the skies remain safe, that planes don't crash, that regulations are enforced. Every law studied, every loophole known. And now that knowledge, that authority, would become the sharpest weapon in this fight. I inhaled deeply, letting the dust fill my lungs. My fingers brushed against the soil, torn and cracked beneath the machines. And I swore silently to the land itself. I would not let it fall. Not to arrogance, not to greed, not to anyone. Margaret Caldwell thought she was untouchable. She thought she could bulldoze history, heritage, and human will without consequence. But she hadn't counted on me. She hadn't counted on Harper Farm, and she certainly hadn't counted on what was about to come. The machines rumbled closer, and the workers shouted over the engines. But this time I wasn't just a man standing in a field. I was a force of authority, knowledge, and relentless determination. The storm had arrived, and it all started here. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The distant rumble of engines had haunted my dreams, turning my childhood memories into a twisted living nightmare. By dawn, the sun had barely kissed the horizon when I stepped outside again. The sight made my heart seize. The western field as a whole, which I had plowed for weeks earlier in the season, was unrecognizable. Earth had been ripped open, trenches gaping like wounds across the land. Crops lay flattened, some trampled beyond hope. The smell of burning fuel and churned soil filled the air, stinging my lungs. My hands shook, not with fear but with rage. Margaret Caldwell was perfectly composed as she stood on the edge of a huge pile of dirt with a clipboard in her hand. She looked like she was looking through an art gallery rather than ruining my family's farm. Workers moved like ants around her, machines groaning under the weight of destruction. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice smooth, rehearsed, almost casual. "You see, we're just enhancing the neighborhood. The community will love it." I laughed. Bitter, hollow, a sound that startled even me. "Enhancing? You call this desecration enhancing?" I gestured at the ruined fields, the splintered fences, the trees torn from the soil. "This is my family's land, my father's legacy. You can't just—" "Legal authority, Ethan," she interrupted, raising a hand almost lazily. "We have permits. Everything is fully documented. This is within our rights. You? You're just a farmer. You can't stop progress." My eyes narrowed. A single, sharp thought crystallized in my mind. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know that the man standing on her father's old porch, surveying the ruin she had created, was Ethan Harper, director of the Federal Aviation Administration. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to threaten. Knowledge and authority were already in my hands, ready to dismantle everything she had built. I walked closer to the edge of the construction zone, feeling the vibrations of the machinery underfoot. Workers paused, some exchanging uneasy glances. They could sense it, the tension in the air, the quiet authority in my stance. Margaret's confident facade flickered for just a moment, a hesitation that passed almost imperceptibly. But it was there. Progress? I repeated, my voice low, deliberate, carrying across the churned fields. You mean destruction? You mean arrogance? You mean theft? Her smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. You'll see, Ethan. One day you'll thank us. I shook my head, letting the anger settle into a slow, purposeful determination. I won't thank anyone who tears down history for money. I turned back toward the farmhouse, my mind already racing. Permits, signatures, environmental reports. Every flaw, every corner cut, every deception Margaret Caldwell had left behind would become her undoing. She had underestimated the farm, underestimated the man standing on it, and underestimated the power of justice and truth. As I stared at the damaged earth, I felt a promise rising from within me. The fight had begun, and I would win, not with brute force, but with strategy, authority, and the unshakable will to protect what was mine. Harper Farm would survive. I would ensure that. By midday, the farm had become a battlefield. Bulldozers and cranes loomed like mechanical beasts, tearing into the fields I had walked as a child. Dust whipped around in the air, adhered to my skin, and filled my lungs as a bitter reminder of the stakes. Margaret Caldwell held a clipboard like a scepter as she stood atop a dirt mound. Her crew worked with robotic precision, oblivious to the history beneath their treads. "You're in my way again, Ethan," she called, voice carrying over the roar of engines. "Reach out before this gets personal." I took a slow step forward, feeling the churned soil sink under my boots. "Personal?" I repeated, letting the word hang like a threat. "This isn't personal. This is legacy. This is family. And you—" I gestured to the devastation around us. "Have no right." She laughed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the air. "Legal documents, permits, approvals. I can't be touched. This is perfectly within our rights." I smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was cold, deliberate, a predator sizing up its prey. She had no idea that she had just walked into a storm she couldn't weather. I stepped back toward the farmhouse, letting the engines fade slightly behind me, and opened my laptop. Every piece of paper she had filed was now ammunition. Forged signatures, falsified permits, environmental studies that didn't exist. Her empire was built on shortcuts and arrogance, and every shortcut was documented. Every false step was visible. By late afternoon, I had begun to strike. Calls to FAA inspectors. Cease and desist notices drafted and ready. Legal challenges queued up. Margaret had believed she could bulldoze, intimidate, and smirk her way through the week. But she had miscalculated. The first worker approached me cautiously. "Sir, are you really—" I nodded, calm and measured. "Yes, and everything you're building here is illegal. Every step, every machine, every shovel of dirt." He swallowed hard and stepped back, unsure whether to defy his boss or respect the authority standing before him. Margaret noticed the hesitation in her crew. Her smirk faltered. "You can't stop progress by scaring people," she shouted. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I simply walked across the field, boots crunching over displaced soil, eyes locked on her. "This isn't intimidation. This is law. And the law is on my side." Her confidence wavered, if only for a moment. And in that moment the battlefield shifted. Although the machines might still roar and the ground beneath us might still shake, the tide had turned. She had underestimated the man standing on Harper Farm. She had overestimated her family's history and heritage, as well as the power that came with protecting them. I felt the first spark of control return by evening as the sun dipped low over the horizon and cast long shadows over the torn fields. Margaret's empire of arrogance was crumbling. Not today entirely, but soon. And I was ready for the fight ahead. I stood in the middle of the field as the sun sank lower, casting the torn earth in a blood-red glow. The machines had paused for the day, but the scars they left behind were permanent. My hands sank into the churned soil, and for a moment I closed my eyes. I could hear it. The faint whisper of my father's voice carried on the wind. "Respect the land, Ethan. It's more than dirt. It's life, it's history, it's ours." I opened my eyes and let the memories wash over me. The laughter of my mother swinging on the old porch swing, the smell of freshly cut hay in summer, the morning spent planting rows of corn with my father, their rhythm a meditation that taught patience, responsibility, and endurance. Each memory was a thread weaving me to this land, and now each thread was being pulled, threatened, and torn by machines and arrogance. Margaret Caldwell thought she could destroy a legacy without consequence, but she didn't know resilience. She didn't know what it meant to inherit responsibility, to feel the weight of generations resting on your shoulders. I walked slowly along the edge of the ruined field, letting my fingers brush against the grass, still standing. Every tree she marked for removal, every furrow of soil she planned to flatten, was a personal attack. It wasn't just land. It was memory, life, and pride, and I would not allow her to erase it. I returned to the farmhouse, climbing the old wooden stairs to the study that had belonged to my father. Dust motes floated in the fading light as I opened drawers and pulled out old maps, property deeds, and aerial photographs. I spread them across the table, tracing the path of her proposed runway. Every corner she had cut, every boundary she had crossed, was visible in sharp detail. After that, as my fingers flew across the keyboard, I took out my laptop. Everything Margaret Caldwell had used to justify this destruction, permits, reports on the environment, minutes of HOA meetings, and legal documents, was now open to scrutiny. And the more I dug, the more I realized she had left a trail of arrogance, greed, and mistakes, each one a weapon in my hands. I had learned to be patient on the farm. It had taught me vigilance. I had gained endurance from it, and now it was teaching me strategy. Margaret Caldwell had overstepped. She had assumed I would panic, that I would step aside. But the land, my family, and my heritage demanded action, and I was ready. By the time the sun dipped fully below the horizon, casting the fields in darkness, I had a plan, not just to halt the destruction, but to dismantle it piece by piece. Every illegal permit, every falsified signature, every corner cut would be exposed. Every tree saved, every inch of soil preserved, would be a victory. The wind rustled through the surviving trees, and I imagined my father standing beside me, nodding in quiet approval. Harper Farm would survive. We would survive. And Margaret Caldwell would soon learn that some roots run too deep to ever be severed. The night settled in, and I stood at the edge of the field, eyes scanning the horizon. The conflict was by no means over, but for the first time since I arrived, I felt the spark of determination ignite into a flame that no arrogance, no greed, and no bulldozer could ever extinguish. Dawn broke over Harper Farm, but it brought no peace. The field that had been my sanctuary was still scarred, churned earth and broken fences stretching as far as the eye could see. Bulldozers sat idle, but the threat lingered like smoke over the ruins. Margaret Caldwell had returned, her confidence bruised but not broken, and I knew the real confrontation had begun. She yelled, striding across the uneven ground with her heels rubbing against the displaced soil. "You're still here. I expected you to withdraw by this point." "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice steady, echoing across the torn field. "This land isn't yours. You can destroy it, but you can't claim it." Her smirk was thin, forced. "Legal documents, Ethan, permits, approvals. You can't touch me. This is within our rights." I stepped closer, boots sinking into mud, feeling the weight of every broken furrow, every uprooted tree. "Rights?" I said, letting my voice carry like a warning. "These are lies, forged documents, half-truths, and I know every regulation you've violated." Workers shifted uneasily, sensing the tension in the air. Margaret's self-assurance slightly shifted. She had controlled this neighborhood for years, believed she could manipulate and intimidate. But she hadn't accounted for the man standing in his own fields, armed not with anger alone, but with authority and knowledge. I pulled out my phone, letting my fingers hover over the screen. FAA inspectors, legal filings, environmental compliance reports, all ready to be deployed. "Every corner you cut, every shortcut you took, it ends today," I said. "Harper Farm has been underestimated by you. I have been undervalued by you." Her eyes flickered with panic. "You can't— This isn't fair," I said in a low, deliberate voice. "Fair doesn't matter. Law matters. You also broke it. Every machine on this field is in violation. Every signature you forged is documented. Every step forward you take will be halted." A hush fell over the workers. The machinery groaned, then fell silent. Somewhere in the distance, the first inspectors arrived, their presence heavy and official. Margaret's smirk vanished entirely. replaced with the flicker of fear I had been waiting for. I walked through the field, boots crunching over broken soil, surveying the chaos she had created. The sun cast long shadows across the torn earth, painting a battlefield in gold and red. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to fight physically. The law, the truth, and my presence did all the work. By midday, I had issued my first federal orders. Construction halted, all machinery immobilized, inspections underway. Margaret Caldwell's empire of arrogance was beginning to crumble. She realized finally that she was no longer in control. Standing in the center of my land, I breathed in the scent of earth and dust. This was just the beginning. The clash had begun and the tide had turned. Harper Farm would fight. The farmhouse was quiet, almost eerie, the kind of silence that carries the weight of the truth. And I would make sure that no machine, no threat, and no lie would ever claim it again. I had spent the night poring over documents, maps, emails, and permits, piecing together the full extent of Margaret Caldwell's plan. And what I found made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a rogue construction project or a small HOA power play. Margaret had orchestrated a massive, deliberate assault on the land, twisting bureaucracy and greed into a weapon. The runway she had bulldozed through my fields was just the beginning. Her concept was a private fly-in community for wealthy individuals with pre-sold plots, secret contracts, and a web of fake approvals. She had turned neighbors into unwitting accomplices, signing off on permits they didn't fully understand. Every document I uncovered was a testament to her arrogance: forged signatures on environmental reports, fabricated HOA meeting minutes, bank records showing kickbacks to contractors. It was audacious, sloppy, and, most importantly, illegal. I spread the papers across the farmhouse table, tracing the path of her runway on maps, noting every violation, every corner cut. Machines had scarred the fields, but the real scars were in the bureaucracy she had manipulated. And now every one of those scars became my weapon. As I ran my fingers through my hair, I sank into the chair. Margaret had believed that because of her wealth and arrogance, she was invincible. But she had underestimated one thing: knowledge. And I had spent my life mastering it, enforcing regulations, understanding every loophole, every subtle twist of law. I was struck dumb by the realization that the fight wasn't just about stopping construction. It was about exposing corruption, holding power accountable, and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Every forged signature, every illegal approval, every attempt to erase Harper Farm's legacy would be laid bare. Outside, the wind rustled through the surviving trees, whispering reminders of the farm's history. My father's voice seemed to echo in the breeze, urging vigilance, patience, and determination. My connection to this land was more than memory. It was responsibility. And now that responsibility demanded action. I stood and walked across the farmhouse porch, looking over the field that had been my home, my heritage, my anchor. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the churned soil in gold and blood-red shadows. Margaret Caldwell had set the stage for her own downfall. She had overreached, and I had every piece of proof needed to dismantle her empire. The farm had taught me resilience. It had taught me strategy. And now it was teaching me the ultimate lesson. Arrogance always leaves a trail, and I would follow it. Every lie, every cut corner, every stolen inch of my land would be accounted for. By nightfall, I had drafted the first of many legal maneuvers. FAA orders, federal inspections, environmental audits, all ready. Margaret Caldwell believed she possessed authority. She thought she could bulldoze her way to victory. But she hadn't counted on knowledge, authority, or the relentless will of someone defending their legacy. Harper Farm would endure. I would too. Harper Farm was bathed in soft gold as the first rays of dawn spread across the churned fields. The machines were quiet, but their threat still lingered like smoke over the earth. Margaret Caldwell thought she could intimidate me into surrender, but she had miscalculated entirely. I walked across the scarred field, feeling every divot beneath my boots, every tree that had survived the onslaught. Each scar in the land was a reminder of what was at stake and a promise of what I would defend. I paused, letting the wind carry the faint scent of disturbed soil, inhaling it like fuel for the fire growing in my chest. Inside the farmhouse, I spread maps, legal documents, and inspection reports across the table. Margaret's reliance on fraudulent approvals, cut corners, and forged signatures was exposed now. The more I studied, the more I realized how fragile her empire truly was. All it needed was precision and patience. By mid-morning, I had begun to strike. FAA inspectors arrived quietly, their presence professional but imposing. Bulldozers ground to a halt, engines cooling like beasts tamed by unseen hands. Workers exchanged nervous glances. Margaret Caldwell, perched atop her dirt mound, felt the first tremor of fear. Her smirk faltered. "Do you really believe you can halt me?" She shouted, voice sharp as broken glass. "This neighborhood needs this. You're just in the way." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My deliberate, calm voice pierced the air. "I'm not stopping progress. I'm enforcing the law. Every step you've taken is illegal. This field has no authorized machines, and every signature you forged will be exposed." Her self-assurance appeared to wane. You can't." "I can," I said, stepping closer, "because the law, history, and this land are on my side. Additionally, I am familiar with every turn you take. It's recorded every shortcut you took. Every move you make from this point forward is under scrutiny." The field felt alive, buzzing with tension. Machines idled like captured beasts. Workers froze, caught between loyalty to Margaret and the undeniable authority standing before them. I could see the doubt flicker in Margaret's eyes. For the first time, she realized she wasn't untouchable. The counterattack was in full swing by the afternoon. All construction was halted by federal orders. Environmental inspections began, uncovering every falsified report. Legal filings were served to Margaret's office, each one striking a precise, calculated blow. I could see her arrogant and deceitful empire crumbling before my eyes. I walked along the edge of the damaged fields, boots sinking into mud and torn soil. The wind whispered through the surviving trees, carrying the echoes of my father's voice. Patience, vigilance, strategy. Harper Farm had endured storms, droughts, and neglect, but it had never faced greed and corruption like this. Additionally, it would endure them now. By the time the sun sank low, casting long shadows over the churned earth, I knew the tide had fully turned. Margaret Caldwell had underestimated the land, underestimated me, and underestimated the authority of truth. The counterattack wasn't just working, it was unstoppable. And tomorrow, I thought, I would finish the fight. The morning air was heavy, carrying the scent of dust, earth, and lingering tension. Harper Farm stretched out beneath a pale sun, scarred but defiant. The cold engines of the bulldozers kept them still, acting as silent witnesses. Margaret Caldwell arrived, her perfectly pressed suit sharp against the chaos she had caused. But the arrogance in her eyes flickered with doubt. "You think you've won?" she demanded, striding across the damaged fields, heels crunching on displaced soil. "You can't stop this. You're just one man." My hair was being ruffled by the wind as I stood tall with my boots slightly sinking into the agitated earth. One man, perhaps, but one man with every law, every regulation, and every ounce of authority at his disposal, I said, voice calm, deliberate, and unyielding. "And you've broken every rule that protects this land, this community, and this family's legacy." Her smirk faltered, replaced with a flicker of fear. "You can't. This isn't fair." "Fair?" I said it again, allowing the word to hang like a hammer. "The law isn't about fair. It's about right. Additionally, your actions are wrong. Every permit, every signature, every shortcut you've taken, exposed. Every inch of this field you tried to steal is protected by truth, evidence, and authority." FAA inspectors, federal agents, and legal representatives arrived quietly behind me. Their presence was a wave of inevitability, and for the first time Margaret realized she wasn't untouchable. Bulldozers sat idle, cranes unmoving, and workers exchanged glances of disbelief. I walked through the fields, boots crunching over torn earth, surveying the devastation she had caused. My father's oak still stood tall, stubborn against the destruction, a symbol of resilience. "You've underestimated this farm," I said, letting my voice carry across the expanse. "You've underestimated me, and now you will face the consequences." Margaret's voice trembled. This isn't over!" I shook my head. "It is, today. The federal orders halt all construction. Every illegal contract is frozen. Every violation is documented. You can no longer act freely." Her empire, built on arrogance, deceit, and manipulation, was crumbling. The neighborhood that once feared her influence now watched, whispering among themselves, witnessing her downfall. Harper Farm had won, not through violence, but through knowledge, persistence, and unwavering resolve. I stood in the middle of the field, feeling the wind brush across my face. The torn earth and the resilient trees that had survived the chaos were highlighted by dust floating in golden sunlight. The battle was over, but the land would endure. My family's legacy would endure. I breathed deeply, letting the weight of weeks lift from my shoulders. Harper Farm had been tested, scarred, and challenged, but it had survived. And as Margaret Caldwell was escorted away, defeated, the field was quiet once more. The machines were gone, the arrogance removed, and the land reclaimed. I looked across the horizon, feeling the satisfaction of justice delivered. Some battles are fought with machines, some with words, and some with authority. However, this particular conflict was personal, and Harper Farm had emerged victorious. The sun rose over Harper Farm, golden and warm, painting the fields in light that seemed to wash away the scars of the past week. The machines were gone, the churned earth still marked with the traces of destruction, but the farm itself had survived. The land, my family's legacy, had regained its dignity after Margaret Caldwell's arrogance reigned. I walked through the fields, each step deliberate, feeling the soil beneath my boots. The battle's remembrances, broken fences, uprooted crops, and flattened grass were still present, but they were no longer signs of defeat. They were proof of resilience, proof that Harper Farm could endure storms, greed, and corruption alike. The faces of the neighbors' faces were etched with awe and relief as they began to emerge, some cautiously and others openly. Stories of the battle, Margaret's demise, and the man who had held his ground and reclaimed his land spread through the community in whispers. Some individuals offered an apology for their involvement, while others simply nodded in respect. I didn't need to be praised, but the acknowledgement of truth, justice, and courage felt good nonetheless. I breathed in the scent of the fields, the earthy scent of the soil, the faint perfume of the remaining wildflowers, and the subtle hint of pine from the distant trees, while sitting on the old porch swing, the wood creaking under my weight. Memories of my parents washed over me, my father's steady hands planting seeds, my mother's laughter drifting on the wind, their voices intertwining with the rhythm of the land itself. This fight had been about more than just property. Respect had been the focus, about heritage, about standing firm when the world demanded compromise. Every signature I challenged, every federal order I issued, every inspection I commanded had been a defense not just of land, but of everything it represented. Margaret Caldwell's challenge had failed. Her arrogance, her greed, her false sense of invincibility, all laid bare. However, this victory was symbolic as well as personal. It served as a reminder that even the most obnoxious corruption could be stopped by knowledge, authority, and integrity. I rose from the swing and walked along the edge of the field, letting the wind whip through my hair. The scars of destruction were still visible, but they were now part of the farm's story. A story of resilience, of survival, and of justice served. I ran my fingers over the soil, feeling its texture, its life, and its history. Harper Farm had endured because it was more than land. Heart, memory, and legacy were all there. And as I looked across the horizon, stretching wide and open, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The battle was over. The land was safe. The farm itself, my father's legacy in the name of my family, would continue to rise. Battles can sometimes be fought in the quietest places. Sometimes the only way to protect what's yours is to remind the world of your strength, your knowledge, and your courage. And Harper Farm had reminded them all. I took a deep breath and let the wind blow away the tension, dust, and conflict's echo. The fields stretched endlessly, golden and free. The horizon was wide. The future was mine. And for the first time in a long while, so was my peace. Harper Farm was home once more.